Madam President, at the very beginning of my statement, we would like to note the hypocrisy underlying today's meeting of Security Council on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. In April, we didn't have meetings on this topic for a month. There was no interest in the situation in Ukraine by France and Ecuador or other Western delegations was not seen. But today we can see that EU members have lined up to read out their similar statements and tick that box. And this is yet another illustration of the fact that there is no genuine concern with the fate of people who live in Ukraine, and even less with those who live in the liberated territories of Donbass. Western delegations were not concerned about the situation of ordinary people there since 2014 either. Nor will we hear today, unfortunately, any expression of sorrow with the fact that on the 28th of April, Ukrainians once again conducted a horrendous shelling of Donetsk, and they were targeting a regular bus full of people. It burned out completely. 9 people died, including a child. Expertise showed that this shelling was conducted using high explosive missiles for MLRS manufactured in Slovakia. And the same shells are also being used to shell the Donetsk Cathedral during the Easter services. Our briefer today didn't say a word about that either. So where is your commitment to the protection of civilians then? Or are these the wrong kinds of civilians? Responsibility for these crimes belongs not only with the Kiev regime, but also with those who supply the regime with weapons. Furthermore, every day we think that the level of pumping Ukraine with weaponry has reached its limits. We receive new information about the new heavy and sophisticated weaponry from the West. MLRS, depleted uranium, long-range rocket systems, hundreds of tanks, etc. And we will revert to this issue in the course of the meeting that we requested on this topic on the 18th of May. All of this weaponry, which is being provided by some, including member states of Security Council, who are so concerned about the humanitarian consequences of the conflict in Ukraine, this weaponry on a daily basis kills civilians, women and children, destroy health facilities in DPR, Alera, Zaporozhye, and Kherson Oblast. The entire military potential of NATO is targeting them, and the Kiev authorities openly boast that legally they have the right to destroy everything that's located in these territories. Once again, we would like to say this to those who have said that already, or will say this later on. The military of the Russian Federation is not fighting the civilians, and it's not subjecting them to targeted strikes, unlike the Ukrainian armed forces. The Western countries are well known for their love to the topic of the issue of combating impunity, especially if this does not cover their own crimes. They think they got away with the millions of civilians killed in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and other countries. We are convinced that one fine day they will be held accountable for these. And no threats of sanctions against judges, as was the case with investigations of war crimes by the U.S. in Afghanistan, or intimidating witnesses or investigative reporters downplaying facts, will be of no help then. We can already see that developing countries are rejecting, those developing countries which are neutral in Ukraine, that they're rejecting the pressure being exerted upon them. And we are convinced that they are now tired of justifying every one of their steps and their appeals for peace. Annalena Baerbock recently said that the potential weapons supplies by third countries into Russia are unacceptable because they can be considered tantamount to participation in the conflict. Well, what about the fact that the entire military machine of the West is now fueling the war? This is yet another confession showing the West's participation in the conflict. With the forbearance of Western patrons, Kiev does not shy away from openly terrorist methods either. Amongst its crimes, the terror act against the Crimea Bridge, killing reporters such as Dugina, Maxim Fomin, and the attempt on the life of Zahar Prilepin, as a result of which his friend died. On the 3rd of March, the FSB informed us that they thwarted an attempt on the leadership of the Republic of Crimea that the Ukrainian MOD intelligence was involved in. And the chief of intelligence of Ukraine openly stated that the that they're ready to kill Russian nationals over the world. And the State Information Agency, Union of Ukraine, after the attempt, published a questionnaire asking who should be next. And if this is not incitement to terrorism, what is it? And how can the people of France, US, and other accept this? They know about terrorism firsthand. How can the Secretary General representative of other international organizations remain silent here? Madam President, we'll hear a lot today about the solidarity of Western community with Ukraine and the readiness to help Ukraine until the very end. But they need to understand that this support will lead the Ukraine to that very end. The external debt in 2022 rose to the level of $132 billion, or 89% of GDP, and it's forecasted that it will exceed 100% of the GDP by the end of the year. The whopping amounts given to Ukraine by the IMF, EU, and Washington, etc., lead it into indebtedness. All of that solidarity is not free of charge, and it will be ordinary Ukrainians who will have to pay back. But while the capital is flowing to the country, it's our understanding that its distribution will give to the American company BlackRock, and Kiev signed an agreement to that to launch a Ukrainian development fund. Under the cover of involving private investments for economy projects, what is happening is a transfer of state sovereignty under external control of a large investment fund with a headquarters in New York. We also stated earlier in the Security Council that in the past 10 years, the amount of Ukrainian arable land, which now under the control of American agro-industrial companies, is in excess of 4 million hectares. And the food supplies that were exported from Ukraine within the Black Sea Initiative were not being sent to the use of the starving countries, but for commercial deliveries. The West has always put its interests at the top of the list. So what we're witnessing once again is a turnover circulation of American money in the world. Most of us will return back to Western corporations. Some of it will remain the offshore accounts of Ukrainian and American bureaucrats. Some of this the Ukrainian leaders will not even be able to take with them when they leave the country in a hurry, as was the case with the former president of Afghanistan. The European countries are equally cynical. When the well-being of the farmers in the EU countries came into play, the situation changed. In April of this year, the countries, which because of solidarity corridors ended up with an oversupply of Ukrainian foodstuffs, introduced a ban on imports and in some cases a ban of transit of grain and other foodstuffs from Ukraine. A large part of Ukrainian food remains in the EU, even though they were initially intended for the global south. And this is a very good example of the essence of the humanitarian initiatives for Brussels. Let me recall here that the relaunching of the solidarity corridors was accompanied of measures to liberalize Ukrainian export in the EU. It made it much easier to supply Ukrainian goods to the EU and not the markets of developing states. Madam President, Russia approaches the food situation of the world very responsibly, despite the fact that the global issues in the area of food security showed up long before the special military operation and were the consequence of the irresponsible monetary policy of Western countries and were worsened by the pandemic. Nonetheless, on the 22nd of July 2022, we positively reacted to the Secretary General's initiative. The main goal here was to ease the situation for food, with supplying foodstuffs and fertilizer to developing countries. A package deal on exporting foodstuffs and ammonia via Ukrainian ports and unblocking the grain and fertilizer export from Russia. But it did not go according to plan. As of the 4th of May, 40% of all production used from the sea humanitarian corridor went into the U.S., and the share of the poorest country here is less than 3%. In a year, the agricultural goods from Ukraine are being used by the West. It is only as of the 18th of March, the beginning of the third stage of the initiative supplies to Africa went up by 40%. And this only became possible thanks to the efforts made by the Russian team at the Joint Coordination Center. They were the only ones who fought for, and even against the UN, to make sure that priority be given to the supplies, to the applications of ships going to Africa. The export of ammonia should have been launched at the same time with grain. This didn't take place. The Ukrainian side in the Joint Coordination Group refused to discuss the unblocking of the ammonia pipeline Tolyatti-Odessa, which is enshrined in the three-party agreement, came up with newer and newer conditions which are not part of the initiative. For almost a year, we see that there has been no progress in the second part of the package deal between Guterres and MOU Russia-UN. The main Russian bank, Rossельhozbank, which is there to conduct financial transactions on export of foodstuffs, is under sanctions. A one-off transactions which were promised by Washington and Brussels are laughable when they are presented as a solution to the problem. The package proposed by the Secretary General is only working on that part which deals with servicing Ukrainian commercial export. And Russian agricultural supplies continue being blocked by Western sanctions. There are no prospects for their easement under the supposedly exemptions for food and fertilizer. The United States and its satellites basically are imposing the topic that the world is in need of Ukrainian corn for animal feed more than it needs than Russian wheat and fertilizer. As we know, last week in Istanbul, four-party high-level talks on the future of the Black Sea Initiative took place, and contacts continue on this. But we'd like to recall here that already in March, at the time of the then extension, we warned if there is no progress on the 5 systemic issues blocking Russia agro-supplies, we can't guarantee that the package agreement will be extended. I thank you.